Hello everyone, I'm back. Haven't made a video in a while. I guess that's a reoccurring theme here. Um, but a couple things. One, I built a computer, and so the hope is I'll stream more and I'll make more videos because my computer is significantly better. I won't have any lag issues. Um, I got really lucky with some of the parts that I built it with. But anyways, that's first off. I got a new computer. Second of all, I don't know if I've ever used this microphone for a video. I probably have a couple times, but I got a new mic. And then third of all, I got a new webcam. So uh, now is a better time more than ever to start this again. And in addition to that, the International Antichess Federation, in which I am a steering committee part of or member part of, is coming up with a bunch of brand new tournaments, which I will be posting many new videos of that on my channel. And hopefully I can help promote that, and hopefully they can help promote me, because the IAF is an amazing federation that I will be working with and as a part of for the upcoming weeks, months, however long, because in particular, there's one sort of new thing that's going to be coming up soon. Guys, some of you may have heard some leaks about it called King of the Board. Basically, the idea is we'll host a tournament every week, and the winner of that tournament will play the current King of the Board, or whatever, the current champion. And after that game, the winner will remain or become the new King of the Board. And so that's going to be really exciting. I'm going to be streaming those games, and then posting them on my channel. But anyways, today is sort of a fun video because for the first time ever, I'm going to be showcasing uh, the game that put me as the number one anti-chess player in the world for the first time. So the story goes, so I hadn't been playing anti-chess for a very long time. My goal was just to study a lot. There's certain lines that I really wanted to become fluent in. And then I wanted to come back because of the massive rating deflation. I wanted to see if I could hold my rating, which was about 2260 at the time. Um, and um, and so because rating was deflating so fast, I was like, I want to see if I can increase my strength so much that when everyone else's rating's deflating, I'm going to try to keep mine the same, which would be really, really cool. But anyways, continuing on with the story, um, most of the time the top anti-chess player would have been 2350, maybe 2300 something. But because of the way it works, so you have to play at least one game every week to be on the leaderboard with a certain low enough rating deviation. The current leaders, who would have been Kex09 and Euro Professional or Flow, they both hadn't played a game in over a week, and so the top of the leaderboard was Penny 7 at 2277, and I was, or no, it would have been 2278, and which was actually my current rating best. My current rating best was 2278, and I was sitting there at 2260, and so Kex messaged me, and that's why he's shouted out right here. Messaged me is like, yo, if you really get into it, and I think it was something like the weekly or the monthly tournament was on, like if you go in there and get 18, 19 rating points, you could have your first number one. And I was sort of debating. I was kind of going back and forth where I was like, you know what? There's not going to be a chance that comes like this every. This doesn't happen that often, and so I was like, screw it, I'm gonna go for it. So I entered the tournament, and I ended up winning my first 15 games in a row, which put me at 2277, which was 1 point behind Penny 7 and 1 point behind my best. And I had lucked out in a couple games, like I had blundered in a couple games, but I had made comebacks. But I had also played some really, really good games, and that brought me to 2277, and it brought me to this game right here, which would have been my final game, versus Glau 2DK, which I've showcased my Anti-Chess World Championship match against Glau 2DK. Sorry if I'm butchering your name. On this channel, if you wanna look at that, it's back in the past somewhere. But anyways, this was sort of a big game. Time control is 3+2, and enough of the stories. At the time of this match, Glau 2DK was rated 1872, so I expected to get one rating point out of this, maybe two if I'm lucky. So this could have been my last game, and I might have needed one more, which would have been stressful. But anyways, after playing 15 games in a row and lucking out, I had this game, and I have the black pieces, and Glau 2DK opens with e3. And I should also mention that one thing that I think contributed to my higher rating this time around is my studying of b6. which the computer, you can see here, calls a blunder. I wonder, I definitely can remove that somehow. Yeah. Uh, but the computer calls it a blunder because, as you'll see in my previous videos about anti-chess opening, Stockfish doesn't always know uh, the greatest openings and the greatest opening strategies. But anyways, I'd been doing a lot of b6 studying, and the reason that really helps a lot is because against lower rated players, a lot of lower rated players don't know the strongest lines against it, and even some higher rated players, like I didn't even know some really strong lines against it until I was 2150, 2200. I also want to apologize quickly for talking so much. I just feel like there's a lot of information, but now we're into the game, so yeah, let's just get into it. So bishop a6 is what Glau2dk played. It's a fine move. a4 is also a good move. You also see bishop b5. In this case, most people play bishop a6, which is what I studied a lot. And Glau2dk actually goes into the line that that I studied the most, and that is with b4. b4 isn't really the strongest move. You're probably in this position if you're looking into openings, which I first of all have a study for, and second of all, Antichess.org has a great resource for, has so many openings you can look at. But really, the openings you should mainly look out of this, if you want to play some really strong openings, are Queen h5 is the best in my opinion, and Queen f3 is also fairly strong. But in this case, we say cb4, and this is what most people play, and that's why I'd studied it so much. And after knight takes b4, we have queen f3, and this sort of is very similar to the antique defense. So after black brings the knight here to the c6 square, and then b4, queen f3. And in this case, I take on a2, and okay, queen takes a8 down here. And then I take this piece down here. And it's important to note here that the strongest move and the best move for sure is rook takes a7. This is what I had studied probably the most. But in this case, Glau2dk played queen takes c8. Anyways, we now have I obviously recaptured with the queen, as it's my only move. We now have rook takes a7, and I play knight d3. So this is all standard. I've been playing fine moves, and Glau2dk recaptures with the c pawn here, and this is where I sort of make my first blunder of the game. In this 3+2 time control game, I really like, basically the main idea in this line for me is my bishop really has this knight under control, so I really want to push these pawns eventually, maybe like with d5, and then I can set all of this up so I can trap the knight. So Stockfish and general opening theory would recommend e6, develop my bishop. Even if you sack the knight here, it doesn't really do anything. Honestly, it just gives my bishop more space, so I'm totally okay with that, or I should have been totally okay with that. And I debated it for a second, but I really liked the idea of keeping my queen to recapture here, and then after the capture down here and the rook recaptures, I would just completely set up for this plan. So I played king to d8, and and I like that Agudmatur does this, so I'm going to start doing it as well. It is as of this move, on move 8, king d8, that there is a completely new position on the board. So okay, rook takes, and I recapture with the queen. Obviously, my plan is into effect, but obviously I did not imagine g3 in most of the lines I played. So I have to capture here. We have h takes on g3, and now sort of a critical moment here. I should have played knight f6. I was afraid of knight f6 because my thought with knight f6 was after rook takes, knight takes, there was always this threat of opening up on my knight. But if I had looked at the position deeper, if anything like g4 ever happened, then I would just have these series of captures, which I guess you're gonna have trouble. Obviously, you don't want to bring your rook there, but there are several different ways. Not exactly that, but I'm not going to have any trouble with anything like this, because even, for example, you have something like g5 just stopping it, and black's completely fine. But anyways, I played knight h6. The other option in this case, there's only three moves: knight f6, knight h6, and h6. Knight f6 was recommended. You could also do this, but I personally didn't like this because it just feels awkward for my knight to develop. My bishops are stuck, and I've got three pieces sort of over defending this h6 pawn. Whoops. Um, so knight h6, rook captures, pawn captures. And we now have knight h3, which develops the knight. And okay, maybe I probably would have preferred knight e2, but that's just me. And I go forward with my plan of d5. I have this long set of captures I can set up, and I can even plan something this way. So my opponent gives up the knight on g5, which I thought was probably not my opponent's best move. You spent one move developing your knight, and now you're just giving it away for very little reason. But okay, I'm happy to take it. And g4 is stopping the advance of this pawn. After g4 here, the computer actually finds mates at about depth 40 with three different moves. It's found that d4 is the strongest mate. I think it's something like mate in 18. So if you want to try to pause the video right now, this is a perfect time to do it. d4 is mate, and then there's two other mates. I haven't looked into either of these two, but the move that I played in the game was b5, and it's important to mention that in this game, after this move, I'm now on 36 seconds, and Glau2DK still has 2 minutes and 18 seconds. So although I have a much better position, it's not easy to spot mate in 20 with 36 seconds left. So the computer, this is another reason not to trust Stockfish. The computer actually calls this a blunder, even though it's mate in 21. Just because it can't see that far into the depth, and you'll see why in a second, why it's mate in 21. And it's sort of just the idea of once I'm able to move this pawn, I can set up for a double capture right here. But anyways, we have e4 now, which is the strongest move. D takes, and f5, which once again is labeled as an inaccuracy, but it's actually completely winning. And in this case, or actually it might not, yeah, it's completely winning, never mind. We have g takes f5, and now I play e5, because why not play the move that forces en passant? Bishop a3, knight takes, and this is where I don't make the correct move. Feel free to pause the video and try to find, I think it's something like mate in 13 for black, so if you want to try to find it now would be a great time to do so. For those of you who did it, you did it better than I did in 30 seconds. I was personally looking for mates with king c7, but I couldn't find anything, so I figured king c8 was safer. In the game I played king c8, but there is a mate with king c7. I'll just show it quickly. Knight takes, and mind you, I looked at this line completely. The special move right here is rook e8, because after knight takes, rook takes, and knight takes, you're able to give up the rook. And here's what I missed is after h6, knight takes, pawn takes, you'll start to see eventually white will have to give up this pawn. There's no way for white to defend against actually a rook promotion. No matter what white does, these pawns are going to be on uneven squares. You can't ever line them up. If they're ever lined up, then you can only move one pawn at a time. So if we're going to make an example, something like king d1 here, there's nothing you can really do. You can maybe try something like this, and then after I advance the pawn, you maybe give up the king or something. And even if you don't give up the king, it's just like this. You have rook promotion again, because no matter where you give up the king, if you move this pawn, then you lose it right here. If you move this pawn, then all it takes is another move. So that doesn't work. Maybe if I advance the pawn, you move the king over, and this is actually a fun exception right here. If you move the king back here, thinking, okay, I can protect against both. First of all, rook promotion actually works, but even faster is knight promotion, because the king can't undefend this pawn. So that doesn't work. You could try something like here, but again, you can just you can even promote king here, and you're going to be winning there. And so yeah, white has no way to defend against this, but I missed all of that. And so after 20 seconds of thinking here, I played king c8. So now I'm down to 8 seconds, and I'm worried because Glau2DK is obviously still at 2 minutes and 15 seconds, and so I've got a long way to go. And this was supposed to be a game that I could win fairly easily, but it's not turning, and it's the game that would have put me at number one. So. It's very stressful at this time, so knight takes b5. And although this is a blunder, it's not like terrible. It's still fairly even. Um, and now I advance the pawn with g4. A lot of, if you're more of a beginner watching this, or someone, I would say anywhere below 2000 or 2050, a lot of people are afraid to push pawns like this. This is actually like a strong move. Stockfish likes it. There's nothing bad about it. A lot of people don't like this because they're like, okay, why am I taking this pawn though? And the reason I really like this is because as soon as this happens, white has a choice, and most oftentimes people will move away from it, which allows me to promote safely. Um, or they sacrifice and I can promote safely. So there's no danger of this. Like, this doesn't do anything poor, and so pushing the pawn, it sort of just gives me, I don't want to have a pawn on the board, I want to have something stronger on the board, and so if it's safe to do so, I might as well push it, because then I get a nicer piece. But anyways, we have knight c7, so giving up the knight, and I recapture immediately. And because there's only 2 seconds increment, I remind you, I'm playing all these moves within 2 seconds or less, because I need to get time back. And we now have f3, so giving away the pawn. I take and king d1 here. And so I see king d1, I'm like, okay, I've got time to push my other pawn now, and so I play h5. We now have e7, and because I figure I don't really want to bring my rook up here, I'm going to play rook d8, and so obviously it's captured, promoted to queen, not that it matters, because king recaptures, and we now have d4. So now Glau2DK is also thinking, okay, I've got to push my pawns as well. So I go f2, we have d5, h4, e5, h3, e6 now, and I play king to d7, which is labeled as an inaccuracy. It's said that king c8 is better, and I can see why, but at 10 seconds, when Glau2DK has 2 minutes and 15 seconds, I'm just thinking, okay, I'm gonna give away my king, and I'm gonna safely promote on the end, just to maybe I can savor a draw out of this. So obviously take, and we now have h2, and Glau2DK promotes to rook. In this case, I promote to king here. The hope is that king is given away, and maybe I have some tactics in the end, and that's exactly what happens. So king e2, take here, and we now have rook g8, and this is a very interesting endgame position. And if you do have the time and you really want to study this position, I highly recommend it, because a position like this will come up in many of your games. And as soon as I saw this, I was more than happy to see this. But feel free to pause the video. Black actually has a mate in 18, but I wouldn't want you to find exactly the moves, but I would recommend trying to find at least the first couple moves, just to see what's just to see if you can figure something out. And so if you did it, very well done. The first move here, and the move that I played in the game, is rook promotion. So I'll be going over a couple lines here just to show. I'll go the line in the game last, which is just giving up the rook down there. But let's take a look at some other moves. So obviously many of these moves lose because I'm just going to give up the rook and then the king. So let's look at rook d8, because if I give up the rook here, then obviously nothing can happen. But in this case, I could just play something like rook f1, and then after the rook is given up, it's basically the same position here as it would have been if the rook is given up here. So let's take a look at this position then. Obviously white only has one move to move the pawn. In this case, I would move my rook up after d7, and now I got to bring my king into the game, because when king promotion comes, I want to make sure my king is close. And we'll go over very soon king and rook versus king endgames. And so the plan here is to continue to bring my king closer. Obviously, I can't come here now because it's completely lost. So one of these moves is in order. Let's say king e8, then we would play rook to b6, just keeping the king in this sort of area. Again, all of these moves are off limits, so you'd have to move to one of these places. So king d8, and then an important move here is king c5. Mind you, if king d5 here is played, then king d7 actually wins the game because both the king and rook control all three of these squares. So that's something to be aware of. So king c5 here, and now king e8, and now rook c6, and it's just sort of this shuffle all the way across. You can't come here, so king to f8, and the important move here is actually king d4, and the reason being is so that when the king comes back you can reshuffle your king, and we have the same position right here. So then as the king moves, you move the rook once again, and so you have to move your king further, and after king e4 and the king moves back, you can get into this position once again, and if we continue to repeat this, eventually you don't even have to play king here this time. You can just move your rook here, and now you're going to be able to win by continuous sacrifices. And so that's what happens if you play rook to g, or sorry, not rook to g1. That's what happens if you give up the rook here or you give up the rook here. It's going to be the same result. So in the game, this is played, and now we have a different version of king and rook versus king endgames. Here. The important thing here is that my king can make it to this rank before my opponent's king can make it off of this rank, and I'll show you why that's important in a moment. King e3, d7, king e4, and after king promotion. The basic idea of this is, if you've seen my other videos and you've played anti-chess for a while, you obviously know that a rook versus king is winning for the rook. And so I can basically block this king from ever getting out because you can't get any closer. So for example, king c8, and I'm just going to follow the king so that the king can never escape off of this rank. And the other thing I want to do is I want to gain the opposition. I want to be exactly across from the king for a couple reasons. So for example, after king b8 and king c5, king c8, I now play rook e1. And what this does is it cuts off the king from running this way. I'm sort of forcing the king into the corner. So all these moves are off limits. In this case, my opponent played king b7, but I'll just show you basically what happens here. If king b8, then I'll move my rook over here. Obviously, the king can't move back now. And the idea is, after you move the king over here, I can play something like rook d5, more or less like a waiting move, so that when the king moves back, I place my rook here. Obviously, again, there's only one move. King goes back here, and after this position, there's nothing left to happen. So in this position, king b7 was played. So I give up the king, and now it's just a simple and now it's just a rook versus king endgame now, which I will most certainly convert. Rook a4, and now we have king d7. I play rook a5, king c7, and then after rook e5, king b8, and rook e6. My opponent resigned, and to my surprise, I got two rating points out of it. Broke my all-time rating high with a new rating high of 2279, and took my place as number one for the first time. I have a couple screenshots that I actually don't have on this computer. But yeah, so that's basically the whole story. And to finish the story, Flo, or your professional, woke up the next morning, saw that I had taken his place because he hadn't played the game that week, played 1900, won the game, and took away my number one title. So I held it for about 12 hours. But for those 12 hours, it was absolutely excellent. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Stay tuned for more videos very soon. Go join the antichess.org team on Lichess, and also check out the website. It's really amazing if you want to learn more. As always, I will be responding to comments in the comments section. You can always personal message me on Lichess if you're ever wondering anything. Otherwise, stay tuned for future videos. I hope you enjoyed. Oh yeah, and one final thing is, please subscribe, because I, just for fun, because I've seen all these other YouTubers make these videos where it's like, oh, 60% of you watching aren't subscribed, and I was like, oh, that's funny. Like, I wonder what my dispersion is. And as of right now, 80% of my viewers aren't subscribed, which is absolutely mind-boggling. So if you're watching this and you like Antichess, subscribe to my channel, and you won't be disappointed. Other than that, share with your friends in the Antichess community. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.